Mumbai, India was struck once again by terrorists. A series of explosions killed at least 21 people and wounded more than 100 others. President Obama condemned the attacks, which were the worst in Mumbai since 2008. Tina Kraus reports.
A string of explosions hit Mumbai during the busy evening rush hour, killing more than a dozen people. The blasts came within minutes of each other.
Therefore, we infer that this was a coordinated attack by terrorists.
One blast hit the Opera House, a tourist destination not far from where Pakistani-based militants killed 166 people in a rampage nearly 3 years ago. Another hit a popular jewelry market where police say a bomb was hidden beneath an umbrella. A third went off in a crowded neighborhood. This man says he heard a massive bomb and ran over to find the bodies of 2 girls lying on the ground. Indian television showed victims being pulled from one of the fiery blasts and rushed into taxis. Bomb squads searched for clues and more explosives. The blasts marked the first major attack since militants held India's financial capital hostage for 60 hours back in 2008. Tina Kraus, CBS News.
And for more on those attacks, we are joined from Washington by CBS News military analyst Jeff McCauland. Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Always great to be with you.
Well, you recently returned from a trip to India where you were the guest of the Indian Army and their senior members there. You mentioned the Indian government was expecting another attack. Why is that?
Well, many of the Indian senior officers I talked with said, in the aftermath of the killing of bin Laden, there was a high probability of an attack by terrorist groups in retribution, if you will, and India being a likely target because of their close proximity to Pakistan, of course, as well as Afghanistan. Second of all, in the last month, India and Pakistan have resumed negotiations to try to settle many of their outstanding issues, particularly Kashmir. And in past, we've seen every time there was some effort towards negotiations, terrorist groups thought that was the opportunity to try to derail those talks by some type of an attack.
Let's look at the history here. The 2008 attack originated in Pakistan, but so far no one has claimed responsibility for yesterday's bombings. Who do you think is capable of pulling off something like this?
Well, most people talk about possibly 2 groups. One is called the Indian Mujahideen. This is a fairly amateurish bunch that have done some attacks beginning back in 2007 in other cities throughout India. The second one is Lashkar-e-Taiba, a much more sophisticated organization with ties to Al-Qaeda. They were certainly the ones the Indians are convinced were responsible for the attack back in Mumbai that you mentioned earlier that killed 166 people. Now, this particular attack was 3 bombs that went off in a fairly coordinated fashion. So there's no doubt this was not some amateurish effort by a couple of suicide bombers, but a very well-planned, coordinated effort by whatever terrorist group is responsible.
Colonel, the Indian government never really responded to the 2008 attacks in Mumbai. So do you think the government is more likely to retaliate this time?
I think if they can identify which terrorist group was responsible, there'll be enormous pressure placed on the government of Prime Minister Singh to, in fact, respond. Many senior officers that I talked with in India said, India showed enormous restraint back in 2008. Fully convinced that the attack then was done by Lashkar-e-Taiba with support from the Pakistani ISI. And they told me with that memory, it would be very, very difficult for an Indian government today, if there was an attack and they could identify the source, to show similar restraint.
Any chance there's a connection between yesterday's attack in Mumbai and the U.S. saying that it's going to suspend $800 million of aid to Pakistan?
Well, it certainly could, but it also further complicates the situation. We know we're at a very difficult moment in the subcontinent. The United States has announced its new strategy for the drawing of its forces from Afghanistan. At the same time, our relations with Pakistan have been enormously strained in the aftermath of the killing of Osama bin Laden and now the announcement of a reduction in military forces. And of course, this attack in Mumbai now just further complicates what's already a very, very difficult and tense situation on the subcontinent.
There's been a history of tension between Pakistan and India, especially in the disputed region of Kashmir. If a conflict was to break out between these 2 countries, where would that leave the U.S.?
It would leave the U.S. in a very difficult position, and we know a few years ago the United States was responsible for convincing both sides not to move to war when they were having a tense period of time. There's been two major wars in recent years between India and Pakistan, as you say, over Kashmir. So this would put the United States in a very difficult position. Obviously, we have forces in Afghanistan. We use Pakistan as a major transit point for our supplies going into Afghanistan. So even though our relations are difficult, we do depend enormously on Pakistan. At the same time, India is a major power in the region, and the United States is making a concerted effort to have improved relations with India. So a conflict or a crisis between India and Pakistan would put the United States in a very, very difficult moment at a very tough time.
All right. CBS News military analyst Colonel Jeff McCauland, thanks again for your time.
My pleasure.